Good afternoon, everyone. It's Dee Lender from the Ontario Association of Residents' Councils. Thank you for joining us today. It's 2 o'clock, so we will get started in just a moment. Now, I'm hearing a little bit of feedback. One moment here. Hi again, everybody. Thanks for your patience. It's Dee Lender from OARC. Welcome to today's webinar. We will be looking over the next hour or so into the tools that have been developed through OARC, the Ontario Association of Residents' Councils, designed to make the most of your residents' council. So just before we start, I'd like to once again thank everyone for taking the time today, an hour out of your Thursday afternoon. I will be recording this webinar, and it will be available on OARC's YouTube channel, probably by the end of the day, in fact. Jennifer Langston here at the OARC office will also be sending out a corresponding link and an evaluation immediately following the webinar. I'm just going to open up my webcam for a moment to introduce myself to you. Hi, everybody. I'm Dee. I'm the Executive Director of OARC, and rest assured I'm with you for the next hour. I'm going to actually disable my webcam so that I can focus more on the content of the presentation of the webinar today. But I am here just on the other end of your computer, and Julie and Jennifer are also here as well. So I'll say goodbye for now, but I'm here with you. Also know that your questions are most welcome. Please if there are any questions that you have or concerns or items for clarification, please use the chat box on your computer screen. Type in your question, and I'll do my very best to get to your question. If for some reason I'm not able to answer your question, or we simply run out of time, I will definitely get back to you and answer your question at a later date. Okay? So here we go. Bye for now. I'm here with you, and we'll go through the slide deck, and don't hesitate to type in your questions if they arise.
Okay, just a comment before you.
I'd also ask please that you mute your lines.
I've got a real.
Okay, thank you. If you are hearing some feedback, please mute your line. So what we're going to do today is spend a little bit of time talking about OARC. We're going to touch on some of the background of OARC and our structure, and give some context, legislative context for the development of the OARC tools that assist you in your Residents' Council meeting process. So let's begin. So what is OARC? What is the Ontario Association of Residents' Councils? We are not a new organization. We are 34 years old. We're a not-for-profit association that is really seen as the main conduit between the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care and Long-Term Care Home Residents' Councils in Ontario. So when the Ministry of Health, among other stakeholders like researchers and the associations, etc., want to know what residents are thinking and want to know about your lived experience in your home, they often come to OARC for an informed meeting or an advisory group, that sort of thing. So we are indeed serving on your behalf as residents in your homes through your residence councils. In essence, our mandate is captured in that fourth bullet that says that OARC is responsible for supporting the formation, the sustainability, and the effectiveness of residence councils in Ontario's long-term care homes. We are governed by a board of directors. This is a very, very different organizational structure. The next photo here shows photos of each of our directors on our board. So we have our board of directors is our governing board. It's made up of residents who live in long-term care homes. Part of the work of the board is governance, and part of the work of our board is actually to serve as a focus group, providing sampled information from all across Ontario. So you can see the names and the faces of our current board of directors right now. We are committed to building a board that is diverse in culture, background, and skill set. And so with that in mind, we do want to put a little bug in your ear that we are in a perpetual state of board recruitment. So if you are a resident living in a member OARC home and you would like to investigate what's involved in becoming a board member for OARC, please give it some thought and give our office a call. It's an exciting opportunity to learn together, to share, to contribute, to be heard, and to make a real difference. So let's talk very, very briefly, and I say briefly not to brush over these topics, but just to recognize that each of these smaller topics today, we could spend an hour or two or three on each of them. We have just an hour together today, so this is kind of an introductory time together, and then really what we want to do is spend the bulk of our time really digging into the tools that OARC has developed. So residence councils have been around for a very, very long time. Some long-term care homes we've worked with have had residence councils for well over 40 years, and others have just recently begun their journey with supporting a residence council. Now, of course, since the acclamation of the Long-Term Care Homes Act a few years ago, every long-term care home must have a residence council. But what's the point, really, of residence councils? Where is the meaningfulness? How is purpose and value seen in a residence council? A residence council must be meaningful. It is not simply a program that is plugged into the calendar of events every month. It is not supported exclusively by the activation or therapeutic rec department alone. And it certainly is not merely or only a complaining session. So let's delve into a little bit around what makes a residence council meaningful. So it's important to understand a couple of these fundamentals. One is that the residence council is much more than the 1-hour meeting each month. So a residence council meeting itself that is held typically once a month, every month that goes by, that is a very, very important part of capturing the collective voice of all residents living in the home, but that's not the only way. So it is designed to capture and express the collective voice of all residents living in your home. But not all residents attend meetings or are able to attend or are able to contribute in a traditional sense. So there's an invitation to all of us to think outside of the box, to think of new ideas for a changing reality, that in most of our long-term care homes, more than 60% of residents are living with cognitive changes, which translate into a residence council where there are fewer people who can attend than those who cannot. Every resident, the third point is very important, every resident in the home is a member of the residence council, whether or not they attend meetings. So by virtue of living in a long-term care home, every single resident is a member of the Residents' Council. So everybody's voice is very important. So our challenge is to figure out ways together in terms of how to capture everyone's opinion and to create that collective voice. The effectiveness of a Residents' Council involves an understanding of the balance between what the law says, what the Long-Term Care Homes Act says, and what residents themselves want for their council. The next slide will explain this a little bit further. So Residents' Councils, an effective Residents' Council is all about understanding the legislation, that it is an advisory, a deliberate, a provincially mandated entity in a long-term care home. It's formally constituted. It is, through our legislation, designed to be the collective voice. And our legislation articulates what we call the 3 R's, the rights, the roles, and the responsibilities that a Residents' Council has within each and every long-term care home. So the legislative experience or the legislative framework provides the minimum standard in accountability and process. But there's so much more to be considered when defining what an effective Residents' Council is, and that's where it comes alive in generating meaningful engagement resident to resident and amongst staff. Residents' councils that are effective create positive mutual support opportunities for one another. It gives residents the opportunity to exercise choice and to be considered part of the team. Now it's interesting because our legislation is very clear that the language used in our legislation is very clear that long-term care homes are to work in direct collaboration with, consult with residents' councils, look for opportunities for input, seek the advice of, and the second last point, the results of whatever's going on in your home are to be communicated with the residents' council. So it's interesting the word seek in the very last bullet point there. So through the Long-Term Care Homes Act, the management of your home is to actually seek out the advice of residents' councils, a very proactive word, seeking out the advice. There's also some language in the Long-Term Care Homes Act that gives direction to the residents' council directly. So the residents' council is to advise the long-term care home in your home, is to advise the management of the long-term care home, is to provide recommendations to the long-term care home, and to review documents. So the language in the Long-Term Care Homes Act directly supports resident-centered care. And that's what we talk about, is that all of the decisions that are made at an operational and an intuitive and a moral framework within your home, it all comes from a resident-centered care place. Resident opinion, values, and wishes are represented through the collective voice of Residents' Council, so it really is in our best interest to support and invest in the Residents' Council so that the truest voice, the collective voice, shines through. Every licensee of a long-term care home shall develop and implement a quality improvement and utilization review system that monitors, analyzes, evaluates, and improves the quality of the accommodation, care, services, programs, and goods provided to residents of the long-term care home. That is taken directly out of our Long-Term Care Homes Act, Section 84. So what that is saying is that every single long-term care home is required by law to have a system, a quality improvement system that looks at the accommodation, care, services, programs, and goods. The regulation that supports that clause in our law is what you see in the blue box on the screen in front of you now. That's the part that invites that ongoing relationship with the Residence Council. So Regulation 228 refers back to that system that's in place to monitor, analyze, and evaluate and improve quality. All of those pieces of information are to be communicated to the Residence Council on an ongoing basis. So you can see with the language in the Long-Term Care Homes Act, ongoing basis, seek out the advice, having dialogue regularly between the Residence Council and the management of the home is very, very important. So that's the legislative context through which many of the OARC tools have been created. This slide that you're looking at now shows some of our main tools. First, you will see the resource guide. Every single home, long-term care home in Ontario does have a resource guide. If you can't put your fingers on your resource guide that was developed for Residence Council leadership and staff assistance, give us a call at OARC and we'll ensure that, that you have one. This was built out of over 10 months with an advisory group consisting of residents, administrators of long-term care homes, assistants to Residence Council, OARC staff, and a consultant writer. And what this does is it makes, it provides recommendations and leading practices for what works, what has worked, and what is hopeful to work in terms of leading and operating a Residence Council. The next piece over to the right is called Understanding Our Law. That is a resource that we also call the blue and black document, because what it is it shows the legislation that pertains specifically to Residence Councils and provides blue text, which is the lay language interpretation of that. So it helps to explain what the intent of the Long-Term Care Homes Act is related to Residence Councils. The next one over is the agenda and minute template, and that's really where we're going to spend the bulk of our time today. We have opening and closing guidelines that help to set the tone for every meeting. We also have newsletters that come out at least 3 times a year called Seasons, and in between the Seasons newsletters we have what's called OARC in Action, which is a bulletin that has some pertinent information from residents' perspective and Residence Council's perspective. So there's a couple of principles to consider when thinking about the OARC tools. We have what's called, on the left-hand side there, Robert's Rules of Order. And we have on the right-hand side the Long-Term Care Homes Act and regulations. The OARC tools marries these two bodies of information together. So OARC works with the mandate to provide support and education in the effectiveness of Residence Councils. And as I said, a large part of that is absolutely the meeting itself. But what Robert's Rules says is that there's an aspect of what we do. It provides leadership and guidance on an assembly that comes together. And in essence, what your Residence Council is an assembly of people coming together. So how Robert's Rules is relevant is just this. This is taken directly out of Robert's Rules with regards to minutes being approved. If the assembly, or the Residence Council in our case, isn't meeting again for a very long time, the process of approving the minutes is delegated to a special committee or an executive board. This practice produces an approved and legal record of the meeting shortly after the meeting closes, but before memories of what occurred in the meeting fade. So this has informed a couple of pieces to our official recommendation with regards to minutes. it has provided some clarity. The Long-Term Care Homes Act states that if the Residence Council has advised the licensee or the administrator of concerns or recommendations, the licensee shall, within 10 days of receiving the advice, respond to the Residence Council in writing. So looking at the Roberts Rules of Order clause on approving minutes and what the Long-Term Care Homes Act says, we have a couple of recommendations that have been embedded into our tools. There are a number of ways that the Residence Council may decide to inform the administrator of concerns and recommendations. The Long-Term Care Homes Act is not prescriptive in that regard. However, our opinion is that the minute document is, in our opinion, it makes the most sense in terms of informing your administrator of your concerns and your recommendations. Because the minute, the document that's called the minutes of the meeting capture the flow of the meeting, they capture the documents that the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care inspectors view to ensure that issues are being resolved. So when an inspector comes into your home and wants to ensure that the concerns and recommendations are being followed up to resolution in your home, they will typically ask for 2 to 3 or maybe even 4 or more sets of minutes that give evidence to the discussions that happen in your Residence Council meeting. By using the minutes, all of the information is kept in one place and can easily be compared month to month to month to follow the process of resolution. I just went this, whoops. The second piece to this, sorry, let me just go back. There we go. The second piece to our recommendation based on Robert's rules is that the Residence Council actually strike what's called a subcommittee to be established, and the sole purpose of that subcommittee is to approve minutes with very, very soon after the Residence Council meeting. So within 2 or 3 days of the meeting, the minutes are approved by someone, by a member of that subcommittee. Once they're approved, then they are posted. The OARC tools are designed to provide structure. They are designed to explore and explain the entire scope of influence that is found within the Long-Term Care Homes Act. They are designed to be an education tool, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more depth very soon. They are designed probably primarily, I would say, to be excellent tools in spurring on communication and discussion. Meaningful communication, meaningful discussion within the Residence Council meeting so that residents are ensured that what you talk about is well within your legislative right. And they are designed, the OARC tools are designed to maximize resident engagement in a strength-based focus. So there are many, many aspects of the meeting that residents from all areas of your home, all abilities, all strengths are able to be engaged in your meeting by taking on 1 or 2 or 3 pieces of the process of running a meeting. I do wanted to let you know also that the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care has seen these tools and they do support the use of OARC tools. The tools themselves are not mandated, but the requirements, the legislative requirements that are captured in the tools are required, are mandated. So here's the process of approving some minutes. So you have your meeting, the meeting occurs, then the minutes are drafted. Then the minutes are given to the Residence Council subcommittee for review, usually within a day or 2 of the meeting. Then the Residence Council subcommittee approves the minutes. With those approved minutes, the administrator is given a copy of those, and that's when the duty to respond begins. That 10 days of accountability begins when the administrator acknowledges receipt of the recommendations. Then the approved minutes are posted publicly with the consent of Residents' Council. And those clauses are drawn directly out of our legislation. When we talk about our companion tools, this is what we're talking about here. Understanding our law, the provisional agenda, the minute template, and tips and hints. And I'm just going to turn my webcam on again so that you can see what I'm referring to. This is called the minute template tips and hints. It's a very short document that supports the tools. This is that document called Understanding Our Law and Residents' Councils. That's what that one looks like. This is the minute template. Whoops, sorry, it's a little bit blurry. I don't know why, there we go. This is the minute template. And this is the provisional agenda. So those four pieces together form what we call companion documents, and they work hand in hand together. So I'll just say goodbye again and turn back to the slides. So here's an excerpt, whoops. Here's an excerpt of the Understanding Our Law document. And you can see there that the legislation is captured in black ink, and in blue ink immediately underneath that is lay language or plain language that describes the intent of the act, that clause. What you'll also notice on the right-hand side is a vertical column that has a number or two in it, which directly refers back to the minute template. So you can see where that piece of legislation is embedded right within the minute template and the provisional agenda. So here's the provisional agenda. This is an agenda that we provide for you to guide your meeting process. And yes, it looks long, but if you have a look at it in more depth, you can see number one is the typical call to order, the welcome, the beginning process of the meeting. Number two is really the meat of the meeting. That's what we would say is the real area for hearty and meaty, meaningful discussion, where you talk about concerns, recommendations, celebrations in all of the home areas. You talk about some reports regarding the treasurer's report, any committee reports, etc. When you look at section 4, 5, and 6, these areas do not happen at every meeting, whereas number 1 and number 2, that is a regular meeting. Those items found within number 1 and number 2, they would happen at every single meeting. Number 3, 4, 5, and 6 happen on what we call a negotiated or as needed schedule. And this is what I mean. Here's number 5 and here's number 6. So this shows these two sections, which capture negotiated times that the administrator will come to your meeting when they've been invited to, or perhaps in some cases it's not the administrator. Maybe it's most fitting for the director of finance, for example, or the social worker to come. So for section 5 and section 6, you can see that all of those topics that are captured here on your agenda, that are taken right out of our Long-Term Care Homes Act, these are topics that you as a Residents' Council have the right and the role and even the responsibility to talk about, but it's not at every single meeting. So draw your attention to 6.1. Let's look at that one for a moment. Homes Financial Statement. The dates that you see here are suggestions only. So these are these dates are open to negotiation and figuring out in your own home between your management team and your Residents' Council what makes the most sense. So let's say that it makes the most sense for the management of your home to come and talk with your residence council about the financial statement of your home in June. So you plug that in and you have it displayed on your agenda so that everyone in your home knows that in June that will be talked about. Then you have the detailed allocation of funding report. Let's say that it makes the most sense to have that discussion in July. So you plug that in. 6.3, you'll see that the resident satisfaction survey has 3 months there. And this is a very special case because there are 3 aspects of the process of performing a satisfaction survey that need to involve the residence council by law. The Long-Term Care Homes Act says that the licensee shall seek the advice of the residence council in developing, carrying out the survey, and in acting on its results. So you can see that the 3 aspects are developing. So the residence council has the opportunity to give input into the questions on your survey. Carrying out, so the residence council has input in how the survey is executed or carried out in your home, and in acting on its results. So the residence council gives advice on the results that indicate the varying levels of satisfaction. So that's why there are 3 dates there, because it's a process that the residence council is involved in. It's not just a one-stop shop or a discussion that happens in one specific month. It's a process that usually involves 3 or more months. Okay, so that's the idea behind the adjusted provisional agenda. So for sections 5 and for section 6, you can see that our suggestion is that you sit down together, your management team and residence council leadership, and talk about what months in the calendar year make best sense to have meaningful discussion, and plug those right in for the whole year so that everybody knows when to anticipate those discussions at the meeting. So here's a snapshot of the minute template that I held up just a moment ago. It is the Word version. This is the version that is all of our tools are available on our website. They're all available in different font sizes, smaller up to quite large font size. Now what's neat about the Word version is that the boxes, the rectangular boxes there, expand and contract depending on how much information you'd like to plug in there. So as you're filling it in after a meeting, if there was a really hearty, long conversation that is really pertinent and you as a council have decided to include the bulk of that conversation, the rectangle will expand to hold all of that. So it's adjustable. The next slide here is the same minute template, but it's called a PDF version. It's also available on our website. This is often used or useful in education opportunities in your home, and you'll see that this is different in only one way. It has yellow conversational bubbles on the left-hand side of each of the subheadings. So when you take your cursor, your little arrow on your computer screen, and hover over your yellow conversational bubble, the legislation will pop right up. So you will see which aspects of the legislation correspond directly to that particular topic. What's helpful here is that in some cases, some people might say, well, why is the residence council even talking about XYZ? Residents, staff, family, a number of people may have questions about why those certain topics are being discussed at all in residence council. So all you have to do is hover over the conversational bubble, the legislation will pop right up, and there's your evidence. There's your explanation legislatively why those discussions are happening. So let's talk a little bit about residence council minutes. In many residence council meetings, it is the assistant who records the minutes. It's a very, very important role. Let's consider a couple of things here. Residence council meetings are meetings for residents, and only residents are members of their meetings. So residents decide what's recorded in the minutes. Therefore, minutes of your meetings may not be a chronological account of everything that's spoken at a meeting. Resident leaders review and approve the minutes prior to posting to ensure that the intent of the discussion is captured appropriately. The third bullet down is one that's very, very important to understand. The assistant to the council is not a representative of the licensee. So the 10 calendar days of accountability begins when the approved minutes are brought to the attention of the administrator and acknowledged, not when the meeting occurred or not when the assistant became aware. And that's an important distinction. So here's the minute template tips and hints. When we developed the tools a number of years ago and we piloted the tools in several long-term care homes residence councils, there were a series of questions that came out of that experience. The questions that came out of that experience are addressed in the tips and hints document. So that you will find, I believe, very helpful to sit down with the minute template and the tips and hints side by side and go right through it from beginning to end, and you will have, we believe, the tips and hints that you need to make the most of these tools. So here's the minute template. Here's a Word version. So this is what you're going to use in your meeting. So here's page 1, talks about which residents have come to the meeting, who are the approved guests, and who is the residence council assistant. Then you have a call to order. You have an option to record who read the opening guidelines. You see section 1.1 says review of previously approved minutes. So because the minutes were already approved 2 or 3 days after the last meeting, what you're doing at this point in this fresh meeting is reviewing the highlights of the approved minutes. You're not seeking approval of the minutes. That has already occurred. Here's number 2, concern response review. You'll see here, I'm going to look at this section a little bit in more detail very, very soon, so I will just skim through it at this point. But this is where you keep record of the issue that was identified, whether a written response was received from the administrator, the date of the written response, what the action was that was detailed in that response, whether the council approved of the action, and ultimately if there was resolution to that concern. Residents' Bill of Rights. It's important to have a discussion about 1 or 2 or 3 residents' rights at every meeting. Meaningful discussion. Here's a spot to talk about your finances as a residence council, your treasurer's report, and various committee reports. If there are any subcommittees that are run through your residence council, this is where a representative may wish to give a report, whether it's a welcoming committee or any number of a palliative care committee, for example. Section 2.5 is where you talk about, as a council, every single program area in your home, and you invite recommendations, concerns, and celebratory comments that are reviewed by the administrator and ultimately by everyone when these are posted publicly. So I'd like to invite you to consider in this section not only identifying concerns and issues or recommendations, but talking about what is going really well. Celebratory comments. Here's some more information here, opportunity for you to record community involvement. At this point, we get into the part of the meeting that is part of that negotiated time frame where these discussion pieces do not happen at every single meeting. So Section 4 is the opportunity for you as a council to discuss and review the inspection reports, and you won't have some. You likely won't have inspection reports to review at every single meeting, probably just a couple of times a year. Then you get into continuous quality improvement reports from the administrator, the home's financial statement, resident satisfaction survey, all of those items that we talked about just a few minutes ago that are negotiated around when a member of the management team would come and give a report and have a facilitated discussion about these. Section 6.6, right here, Residence Council Assistant. The law says that the Residence Council Assistant is to be acceptable to the Residence Council. That's the term that's used in our legislation. So this provides opportunity for the Residence Council to have discussion once a year to record that the assistant is indeed acceptable to the council. On this page, which is the last page, I wanted to draw your attention particularly to a couple of points here. One is where you're looking at minutes approved by, Section 8, minutes approved by. That's where a resident who is part of the Residence Council Subcommittee would sign in that box and date it, and that is usually 2 to 3 days after the meeting. When that signature is on those minutes, they've been approved. The next line down says Residence Council has given consent to post minutes, because it's well within the Residence Council's right to post the minutes, to give consent to posting the minutes, or to decline consent. So there's an opportunity there to check yes, the council has given consent, or no, there has been no consent. The next box down is where the administrator would sign, and I just wanted to stress here that this is not the administrator approving the minutes. This is opportunity for the administrator to acknowledge that he or she has received acknowledgement, is now at this point in time aware of the concerns or recommendations brought forward by the Residence Council. So the administrator signs in that box and dates it. That date on next to his or her signature is the date from which the 10 days of accountability begins. So let's look at a practical example. So here we are in a meeting. It's September 8th, 2016. Let's pretend that we have a Residence Council meeting today. And I am privileged to be the assistant to the Residence Council, and we're having a discussion in this time of our meeting. And I say, does anyone have any excuse me, does anyone have anything they would like to share about the administration of the home? And I've talked about nursing and personal care, restorative care, now we've got to administration. And today residents are very, very clear that they are appreciative in seeing the administrator out and about during the day speaking with residents and family members. So that gets typed into this section of the agenda. And then I continue on with religious and spiritual care, and then I come to environmental services. Does anyone have anything to share about the environmental services? Anything at all? And then a discussion ensues around, well, you know what? There were drafty windows in the south dining room. So there's a concern that is brought forward through the Residence Council, and it's decided in that meeting collectively that the council would like to bring that concern forward to the administrator. So here's an example of 2 entries on this page. One is more celebratory, good news. The other one is more of a concern, or is a definite concern. So if you look at the top, meeting number 1, September 8th, that's the meeting that happens today. So then let's look at how this is recorded a month from now at the next meeting. So here's the second meeting, October 8th, 2016. So now we look at section 2.1, and here we have, look at that, there was an issue last time about drafty windows being identified in the south dining room. Okay, so it's a complete loop. We call this the accountability loop. It was identified last month, and now for this month, we review this and we say, okay, there were drafty windows identified in the south dining room. Was a written response received? Yes, it was. What was the date of that written response? Well, the written response that we have from our administrator was dated September 13th, 2016. Well, what was the action that was taken or outlined in that written response? Well, our administrator explained to us that there would be caulking of the windows done, and it was going to be done by September 18th, 2016. So at this point in the meeting, a conversation is facilitated, and the council actually gets to decide, was that action taken, did that action satisfy the concern that was brought forward? And in this case, yes. The council approved. Council approval of action, yes. So sometimes it might be no. If council did not approve of the action that was taken, identified with that concern, then the answer would be no, or no would be indicated there. Resolution. This is what is really, really important. Bottom line is that we're looking for resolution to any identified concerns. And in this case, yes. But if it's a no, then that issue is carried forward. And that's the type of discussion that is captured through this accountability loop, month after month after month. So at this point, I would like to invite you to give these tools a try, to go to OARC's website, have a look with the assistance of your long-term care home staff members, team members, or your residence council assistant. Perhaps you could sit down together with the companion documents, the tips and hints, the minute template, the provisional agenda, and see how they all fit together. Have some discussions about what you might like to see different, what you might like to change in your residence council process. And bottom line is, I would invite you to please contact OARC if you get stuck. If you have questions, if you have moments of you know, I'm not sure what the intent is. Or if you have success stories you'd like to share with us about how these tools have helped you capture some really meaningful discussion and celebrate what's working well and move forward to resolve some issues that need some work. So if you do have any questions, please contact us at the office. Again, my name is Dee Lender. Susan Thibert is the Education and Home Support Coordinator. And I'm just going to see if there are any questions that have been written in the chat box. I don't see any questions that have come up. No. So Julie and Jen here in the office have indicated no, there are no questions that have been typed in. I'll just stay on the line now in this open webinar for a little bit more, a couple of more minutes, if you'd like. Okay. So have some discussion amongst your teams. And again, let us know if you have success with trying these tools, and certainly if you're having any difficulty or any questions arise. Okay, with that, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today, and we look forward to supporting your councils as we move forward together. Thanks very much, everybody.